So just a quick word before I get to the budget and the economy. My congratulations to young Kyle Rittenhouse for his across-the-board acquittal and complete exoneration of all charges. In this country, thankfully, the right of self-defense is still protected by our Constitution, and it's an integral part of the rule of law. In this difficult trial, justice was done. My hat's off to the jury that performed their civic duties seriously and valorously in the face of threats to their well-being. And I also want to tip my hat to the judge, also facing threats to his well-being, who ran a tough but fair courtroom. In a few moments, we're going to talk to Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson about the trial and then the budget. Now, on the budget story, we know this triple B, I call it bankrupt benefit and bureaucracy bill, is a disaster for the economy. It should have been killed. We should save America and kill the bill. As for the CBO scorecard, they've done what their Democratic House masters ordered them to do, but the scoring, of course, is a complete gimmick-prone scam. You know, 1 or 2 year phase-outs for entitlements and transfers that should be scored as 10 years, because that's the political intent of the big government socialists. Meanwhile, there are 10 years of taxes. They have, in fact, found their way into the bill and into the scoring. Now, I can't really blame CBO because they're doing what they were told to do. But I sure can blame the left-wing progressives who were behind this. And by the way, the U.S. public sees right through this whole scam. They know full well that there's really $5 trillion of spending. That is intended by the woke progressives, not $1.6 trillion, but $5 trillion. And these phony baloney estimates of a $367 billion deficit with a couple of $100 billion of phony IRS tax cheating revenues, all leading to a phony deficit of $160 billion. No, it doesn't pay for the whole package as proposed. But all these crazy budget numbers amount to all chaff and no wheat, all hat and no cattle. There is no meaning here whatsoever. It's the underlying policies that matter, and those policies are terrible. Modeling from Penn Wharton and the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, by the way, they're certainly not supply-side shops, but their modeling gets you to $5 trillion of spending. And given raging inflation, which I fear is now in a new takeoff phase, you've got massive federal spending, massive money printing to finance it. We truly have too much money chasing too few goods, as Milton Friedman put it, I don't know, 7 decades ago. Poll after poll shows inflation is public enemy number one, and voters identify big government spending with rising inflation. So with all their gimmicks and trickery and jujitsu policy somersaults to hide the truth, this is going to cost Democratic House members major losses in next year's midterm elections. And speaking of a new Republican House, Republican leader Kevin McCarthy gave a brilliant speech last night. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I think it's the single best speech from a congressional Republican leader in at least 3 decades. Please take a listen to some of it.
From bank surveillance to bailouts, this bill takes the problems President Biden and Democrats have already created and makes them much, much worse. How can you look at your constituents in the eye? With one-party rule, in 1 year, you created inflation we haven't seen in 31 years. You made gas price higher than it's been in 7. You're passing a bill that gives amnesty to illegals. You're charging more than $5 trillion in this bill. More than 2,000 pages. Enough.
Enough. Spot on. Great job. Here's a few things among a slew of terrific policy points that Mr. McCarthy talked about. Welfare without workfare, higher energy costs from the Green New Deal, a bigger inflation tax on the middle class, IRS snooping in your bank accounts, and new agents roaming around the country trying to find alleged tax cheats. The federal government trying to replace families and parents, whether it's child rearing or education or work. Mr. McCarthy talked about left-wing social engineering and printed money, leading to massive runaway inflation and paying people not to work. I mean, it was just a superb speech. And I'll just conclude with this quote. Republicans believe the family is the foundation of a strong society. But we also know work established purpose, and there is no government substitute for a job and an earned income. Again, hats off to Mr. Kevin McCarthy. Now, speaking of taxes, and Kevin Hassett's going to be here a little bit later, massive tax hikes will undermine the whole supply side of the economy. Economic growth incentives are punished everywhere. Minimum corporate taxes at home, minimum corporate taxes overseas, surtaxes on successful earners. Successful earners, you know, that really means small business owners who are the job creators in our economy. Then there's tax burdens on business capital investment that's so vital for productivity and higher real wages to the middle class. Things like new plants and equipment, tech advances, worker training, all of that will be slammed by those tax hikes. Long-run capital investment could shrink by 8%, according to the Penn Wharton. Potential GDP could fall by 2.5%. And the Biden bill will even let foreign countries determine American corporate tax burdens, really. You know, I once worked for a president whose last name was Trump, who believed in America first and told us many times in the Oval that the only people who can decide how to tax American businesses are American voters, not foreign governments. And then there's the welfare payments to illegal immigrants, amnesty measures without any real immigration reform, and then the bill strikes down the 45-year-old Hyde Amendment that prohibits federal funding of abortions. And once again, I want to underscore the debilitating policies whereby transfer payments from welfare, nutrition, unemployment, child allowances, paid leave, pre-K, and other areas are not exchanged for work. This may be the most debilitating policy of all to the American ideal. And summing it up, I want to invoke Steve Forbes' idea of modern socialism. He said it on this show a few nights ago. The government doesn't physically take over steel mills or car factories or iron foundries like they did during the Leninist Stalin period in the 1920s and 30s. No, modern socialism is the humongous regulatory overreach that controls all industries like banking, oil, gas, healthcare, and many, many others. Will this monstrosity be stopped in the Senate? It's a big question. I sure hope so. And of course, whether Joe Manchin will stand his ground on inflation. Inflation has moved from 2 to 4 to 6%, now perhaps even 8%. Mr. Manchin has said no more spending. He's calling for a pause, at least until inflation starts coming down. And Janet Yellen says inflation doesn't peter out until the second half of next year at the earliest. So my point is a simple one. Not only must Manchin and Sinema stop welfare without work, stop destroying fossil fuels in our energy economy, stop crippling tax hikes, but they need to fight for a complete pause in new spending, a total pause in new spending, at least until the second half of next year. There should be no new spending at all. Save America, kill the bill. That is still my riff.